The Rothesay class, or Type 12M, was, like the Leander class that would succeed them, a modified Type 12 or Whitby class frigate built for the Royal Navy, as well as being exported to many navies around the world. Because these vessels were modified Type 12s, they have very similar, if not exactly the same specifications of the Type 12s, but for the purposes of the video, I will cover them. So, the ships of the class would displace 2,150 tons as standard and 2,560 tons fully laden. They'd be 110 metres long, 12 metres wide, and have a draft of 5.3 metres. They, like the Leander class that would be succeeding them, they would be powered by 2 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, along with 2 English electric steam turbines, powering 2 shafts for 13 knots. Or for about 12 knots, they could sail 5,200 nautical miles, or roughly from Her Majesty's Naval Base Plymouth to Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, with about 40 miles left in the tank. However, they would have to replenish every week for fuel and stores for 152 crew of officers and ratings. The ship's initial armament would consist of one dual 4.5-inch Mark N6 gun located on the forecastle. This weapon was capable of about 260 degree coverage with an elevation from level to plus 80 degrees. These weapons were capable of about 10.2 nautical mile range, with 16 rounds per minute being fired from each gun. One 40mm single Mark 7 Bofors cannon, capable of between 120 to 330 rounds per minute. Each mount could traverse 92 degrees and were capable of firing at an elevation of minus 20 to plus 80 degrees. The weapon system could fire at 1,021 feet per second to a maximum range of 6.48 nautical miles. And then finally, 2 triple-barreled Mark 10 Limbo anti-submarine warfare mortars, effective out to 914 meters. Additionally to this weapon system loadout, the ships would initially be designed to carry 12 21-inch torpedo tubes in 2 full-bank fixed mounts, as well as 2 dual trainable mounts. However, this would be quickly removed if it was actually fitted. It wasn't that great, and they moved on to something a lot better. The sensor and radar fits of these ships would be as follows. One Type 974 navigational radar operating in the India/Juliet band. This has an instrumented range of 25 nautical miles. One Type 293 Quebec short-range early warning radar operating in the Charlie band. Its expected range was about 20 nautical miles. One Type 275 fire control radar for the ship's main guns, operating in the Echo Foxtrot band, with a radar range of about 16 nautical miles. One Type 277 Quebec height finding radar. This operated in the, again, Echo Foxtrot band, with a range of about 86 nautical miles against aircraft. And finally, a Type 1010 Mark 10 IFF transmitter and receiver. The ship's sonars would be a Type 174 active search sonar, Type 162 target classification sonar, and then finally a Type 170 attack sonar. I think from the radar and sensor fits, you can definitely tell these ships were designed around the anti-submarine warfare role. Well, with that out of the way, this class was designed and built to use the excellent Type 12 hull because it allowed for high-speed cruising in heavy seas, like the North Atlantic and the North Sea. And this was to be crucial as the threat of Soviet submarines was increasing. And so 13 vessels of the improved Type 12 design would be ordered by the Royal Navy, 3 for the South African Navy and 2 for the Royal New Zealand Navy. The lead ship, HMS Rothesay, would be laid down in November 1956 at Yarrow in Glasgow. The other ships of the class would be Yarmouth, built by John Brown & Co. Londonderry was built by J.S. White & Co. in Cowes. Rhyl and Plymouth were built at Her Majesty's Naval Base Portsmouth and Plymouth respectively. Berwick was built at Holland and Wolff. Falmouth was built at Swan Hunter on the Tyne. Lowestoft was built at Alexander Stevens and Sons in Glasgow. Brighton was built by Yarrow. Weymouth was laid down by Holland and Wolff but never finished. Fowey was laid down at Camelard but was never completed. Hastings 1 was ordered at J.I. Thornycroft but was never laid down. Hastings 2 was laid down at Yarrow and finished as the HMNZ Otago. HMNZS Taranaki was built by J.S. White & Co. The SAS President Kruger was built by Yarrow. The SAS President Stein was built by Alex Stephen and Sons in Glasgow. And then finally, the SAS President Petrorus was built by Yarrow. All of the Royal Navy vessels would be commissioned between March 1960 and September of 1961. Pretty fast, to be fair. The Royal New Zealand Navy vessels would be commissioned between June 1960 and March 1961. And then finally, the South African vessels would be commissioned between October 1st, 1962 and March 4th, 1964. By the time these vessels would be completed, the K-19, the famous Russian SSBN that was plagued with so many problems, had actually come into service, showing that the USSR was investing heavily into submarines, nuclear and non-nuclear, something which these vessels were actually designed to counter. So, the ships in the Royal Navy's service would be used to try and detect Soviet submarines trying to break into the Atlantic through the Greenland, Iceland and UK gaps throughout the 1960s, as well as making trips throughout the world, with stops to the Caribbean being recorded for a 25-second shot in the James Bond movie Thunderball, deployments to the Far East and other fun places. These vessels would be very popular with their ship's company and the Royal Navy themselves because of their tracking ability for the Russian submarines and the fact that they were air-conditioned, and they would be the first ships in the fleet to start bringing in the standard bunk system that you find on British warships after this class. However, the Leander class would be the first fully bunked ship, as this ship class actually had a half and half system of half bunks and half hammocks. I think I'd actually prefer the hammock, but oh well. As the 1960s drew on, tensions mounted, and so did the Soviet submarines. With increased speed, they were quieter, better equipped, etc., etc. And so, these vessels would be brought in for a mid-life refit. This would change up the ship's sensor fits, weapons fits, and even add a helicopter. So the mid-life refits started in July of 1966 and lasted to June of 1970, with Rothesay herself being the first refitted in Rothesay. Along with the improvements, the 40mm gun would be replaced with a Seacat missile system, as well as radar and communication equipment upgrades and updates. The accommodation was improved, and perhaps most significantly, a helicopter flight deck and hangar were added. Although these required the removal of one of two of the triple-barreled anti-submarine warfare mortars, it allowed for the Rothesay class to carry a Westland Wasp helicopter, which was a huge asset for the anti-submarine operation. This modernisation was a vast improvement over the Whitby class and brought the Rothesays up to the standard of the Leander class. The after superstructure and the foremost limbo mortar was removed, and the well, which the limbo had been sitting in, was plated over to create a small flight deck. A small hangar was constructed in front of this, on top of which the GWS-20 Seacat missile and its director were finally shipped. The main mast was replaced by an enclosed design carrying the Type 1010 IFF antennas. The funnel height was increased to carry the hot exhaust over the taller superstructure. The electronics fits were upgraded from the World War II era sets fitted on the Whitbys. A large enclosed foremast replaced the short lattice one, carrying a distinctive quarter cheese antenna associated to the Type 993 target indicator radar. The Mark 6M director was replaced by the MRS-3 Mod 3 system, carrying the radar Type 903. The latter, more automated and compact 1967-63 version of the MRS-3, using transistor electronics and analog computers, allowing the removal of the Type 277 Quebec height finding radar. Additionally, Corvus 3-inch countermeasure launchers were fitted either side of the bridge, as were a pair of World War II vintage 20mm Orcans for quote-unquote policing work and strictly limited anti-aircraft defence. So, after the refit, and during the 1970s, their anti-submarine warfare patrols continued, along with participating in the first, second and third Cod Wars with Iceland, over fishing, of all things, with a few coming into literal contact with Icelandic gunboats and coming off a little bit worse for wear due to their thin hulls. By 1978, however, Rothesay, Yarmouth and Plymouth were given a 2-year-long refit to significantly update their radars. By the beginning of 1982, many of the class had actually been relegated to the standby squadron, likely to be disposed of following the 1981 Defence Review. However, by the outbreak of the Falklands War, it basically revived the class, with Plymouth and Yarmouth being dispatched with the task force, with Plymouth playing one of the most active roles of any ship. While the class proved highly seaworthy in the rough South Atlantic seas, particularly in the winter patrols that followed, the initial favourable assessment of their performance in the war was to be revised. It was questionable whether Seacat achieved a single kill, although both Yarmouth and Plymouth claim they shared a single hit on a Douglas A4 Skyhawk. That's just gunners being gunners. But anyway, Plymouth's Wasp helicopter guided a AS-12 missile onto the elderly surface-running submarine, the ARA Santa Fe. If you want to listen to a video on that, I have made one, so go have check a look. But only after it had been prevented from diving by depth charges and torpedo hits from the destroyer HMS Antrim and from its Wessex and Lynx helicopters. On the 1st of May, Yarmouth and the modern Type 22 frigate HMS Bristol detected a submarine, the ARA St. Louis, which fired at least one German anti-ship SST-4 torpedo at them. However, in return, they failed to sink the submarine in 20 hours of mortar, torpedo and depth charge attacks. That's pretty shabby going, to be honest. But anyway, it's underwater warfare for all you. So, in the following weeks, the limitations of the Rothesay class design was basically apparent, with the lack of a modern sonar and the lack of Link 10, which is a data link for ship-to-ship communications when it comes to your radar plot. Other than Brighton, the rest of the class were refitted post-war, allowing for losses and damages suffered by the Royal Navy during the conflict to be rapidly made good. Now, Berwick and Falmouth could be retained in a state of high readiness in the standby squadron, in the expectation that they would be given a further long refit, possibly as towed array frigates. Their sister ship, Lowestoft, had been tested in this role. Berwick, in particular, still proved herself useful after a short refit, given another 3 years of operational service until mid-1985. The class would be paid off through the 1980s, and the Rothesay herself finally paying off in 1988. The demise of this class also saw the withdrawal of the Wasp helicopter. The Leanders, which also carried Wasps at that point, would also be upgraded to carry the Westland Lynx. Now, let's fly to the other side of the world, to the place next to Down Under, where we join the Royal New Zealand Navy, and they ordered 2 Type 12 ships in February of 1957. Now, Hastings, the second ship to be called Hastings, not the first one that was actually ordered but never laid down, but the Hastings that was laid down, bit confusing. Anyway, that would be transferred to the Royal New Zealand Navy as the Otago, not Otago, Otago, spelled with an O instead of an A. However, whilst that was under construction. So the next one would be the Taranaki, which was ordered directly from the builders. Now, they introduced bunk rather than traditional hammock bedding, and were rather different messing arrangements than the Royal Navy's Type 12s. These ships would actually be fitted with Sea Cat missiles by 1964. Now, unlike the Royal Navy Rothesays, the Otago and Taranaki actually were armed with the Mark 20 heavyweight anti-submarine torpedoes, but they abandoned them in the mid-1960s, when it was clear that the Royal Navy would only develop these weapons for submarines. The official reason the Royal New Zealand Navy abandoned the heavyweight torpedoes was the Mark 20s were too slow at 24 knots. That's quite slow for a torpedo. Anyway, the Mark 32 tubes to fire the Mark 44 or 46 12.75 inch US lightweight torpedoes, which was surplused and supplied to the New Zealand Navy in about 1971, were as surplus of requirement to the US Navy, because their life expectancy had actually expired. And so, in a typical US Navy fashion, they sold them to a different country, this one being the New Zealand Navy. By 1974, the Limbo launchers were actually removed in major refits, and a majority of the Royal New Zealand Navy officers and ratings opposed the change, on the grounds that the mortars were actually quite effective during the Cod Wars. Not entirely sure why, unless you want to go mass fishing with a bunch of mortars, which apparently is quite good. But, needless to say, New Zealand considered modernising the Taranaki with gas turbines, but retired the ships after 1981, when 2 surplus Leander-class frigates were offered for sale by the British. And, if you've watched the Leander-class video, you probably know they took the Leanders. Now, moving down south to the African continent, all the way down to, well, South Africa, 3 Type 12 frigates were ordered as part of the Simonstown Naval Agreement. They were identical to the Royal Navy vessels when built, but were altered during refits. Now, the 3 ships were named after presidents of the Boer republics, being the President Kruger, the President Stein, and the President Pistorius. Now, the modernizations involved installing a hangar and flight deck for the Western Wasp helicopter, as well as removing the Limbo mortar to form a flight deck, replacing the air search radar with fire control systems, and adding 2 triple 12.75 inch anti-submarine torpedoes. Very similar to what the Royal Navy did with theirs. Anyway, the ships proved difficult to maintain due to arms embargoes, and the President Stein was decommissioned in 1980 to provide spare parts to the other vessels. So the fate of the Royal Naval vessels would be scrapping for the Rothesay in 1988, Londonderry was sunk as a target in June of 1989, Yarmouth was sunk as a target practice for HMS Manchester, not entirely sure if she used Sea Dart or just a 4.5 gun or some mythical paper weapon system they like to throw around sometimes. Rhyl was sunk as a target in September 1985. HMS Plymouth was acquired by the Warship Preservation Trust and was towed for display on the River Clyde, but in the late 1990s she was towed to Birkenhead. However, by 2006 she would be closed to the public. After a campaign to save the ship in 2014, she unfortunately would be sent to the scrapyard in August of 2014. But she'll get her own video at some point. Brighton was sold for scrap in September 1985. Berwick was sunk as a target in August of 1986. Falmouth was scrapped in 1989. And finally, Lowestoft was sunk as a target in June of 1986. Now, the final part to add to this video before I call the end. The Royal Australian Navy also had 4 vessels of the Rothesay class, but they were part of their River class vessels. Now, these vessels were Yarra, Parramatta, Stuart, and Derwent. The River class will get its own video at some point, and to be honest, when I read into it, I couldn't really understand if they were kind of just Leanders or modified Rothesays. I really don't have a Scooby-Doo. So I'm going to have a read about that at some point and try and work it out for that video. So, yeah. Rothesays. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so that's the end of that video. Hopefully you learned something new, because I most certainly did. Now, if you want to go and support the channel, there is a link in the description below to the Patreon page. I would recommend doing it, but it's up to you. Also, if you want to come and talk to me, there's a link in description for the Discord channel. There's a couple of good guys over there. We talk about a wide variety of stuff. So yeah, so thanks for watching, guys. Hit that notification button to stay up to date with what I'm uploading. And obviously give it a like, give it a subscribe if you really want to, and comments are always good. I like reading your comments. So take care. Catch you next time.